Welcome, everyone. We've got a great crowd globally tuning in to the Insight Revenue Effectiveness Key Trend Report webinar. We're all very excited to have you here today. So, just to get quick started today we're going to be discussing the results of a study that we've done over the past 6 months of 50 plus organizations, looking at really the way that your company is delivering value across the full customer lifecycle and how well aligned internally your company's teams are in order to help you be able to prioritize and plan for next year. We've got a great panel put together today to discuss those trends and give advice. The study was actually built by your real host today, Timur Hicyilmaz, who is actually has a long history of building some of the most important studies done in B2B sales and marketing over the years, including with organizations like Corporate Executive Board and Gartner and Challenger. So really excited to hand over to him in a minute to drive the discussion today. And also just totally thrilled to have such a great panel with different perspectives on what do you do with this information and how do you really get an edge for next year. So we've got Jeremey Donovan from Insight Partners. We've got Kara DelVecchio, Chief Sales Officer of Pluralsight, and Hendrik Isebaert from Showpad. Welcome, guys. Hopefully I pronounced everyone's name right, and really excited to have you on the panel.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Excited to be here.
Excellent. Just as a quick note, for those of you who haven't had a chance to participate in the study, we will be sending out an individual link for you to take it yourselves. If you have any interest to have your whole organization take this to see the diverse points of view and help you benchmark, we're happy to pick up that conversation as well. And without further ado, I will turn over to Timur.
Excellent. Thank you, Zach. All right. First, let me orient you to what we're discussing, which is data that we've collected in the last few months. As Zach said, we got data from about 51 different companies, 130 odd people, and what we asked them to do was two things. We asked them to tell us right now for your business, as you think about GTM, what matters most to you. And this was 9 categories mapped to this graphic that you're going to see on the right here. So everything from, is it about generating awareness about your product solution? Is it generating interest, or is it about the close, the expansion, recommendation, whatever it is? And then we asked people to rate their effectiveness at sort of 3 tactics each, 3 tactics that map to the different categories. And the idea was this will give us a great sense for how people think of the current state. Also, we hoped that it would help us sequence the investments. Because Zach and I, we were setting up this business. We've been chatting with a lot of people. And what we found is everybody has a sense for all the things you could do. But it's an overwhelming list of things. So the idea was, can we narrow this down and come up with some conclusions that are going to be relevant to everybody? A couple of things about the sample. It is a cross-industry sample, but it does skew more heavily towards SaaS and technology. And given our background, maybe no surprise, it does skew a little heavy on the sales side, and I think you'll see that in the data. Zach said we've run this a couple of times for some larger companies. Then if you get marketing, CS, service, then you start seeing some slightly different perspectives underneath it. But nonetheless, we think this is a pretty good snapshot and a good occasion for the discussion. So that was a little bit of background. Now let me start showing you some data. And for any of you who know me, you'll know that I specialize in really complex, detailed graphs. And so here's one of those. But honestly, this one is pretty simple. What you're seeing here is the effectiveness on the 27 different tactics. It's organized by these 9 categories that you see here on top. And the scores this is the top 2 box. So this is the percentage of people who said that they scored well at something, well or very well. And the thing that stands out to you is, well, only one of them actually gets to 47%. So, not even half the group thinks that they are necessarily excellent at this. And this, by the way, is problem mastery. So this is, the sense that you're solving for an important customer problem. Most people's answer, by the way, is so-so. That's the flip side of it. So I think that's the concerning thing. But the question I wanted to start with, if I look at these scores, what I see is that they're actually really low. Like if typically when you do a study like this and you ask about, say, something like engagement or willingness, you'd expect scores that are much, much higher. And so my starting question really is, as you think of the macro environment, like how much of it do you think is being governed by that? How much of this do you think is a genuine big problem about current GTM strategies? And in general, like what stands out to you?
I guess one clarification, which is this sellers rating themselves on their ability to do these things? In which case, I would be very surprised, right? So, like that a seller would feel that they were not good in even in the problem mastery category that you said, or is this more leaders assessing their companies and their salespeople? Because those could be very different answers.
This is leaders assessing their companies by and large.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like meh. Is I think is how you would
I guess they have
it.
themselves to blame in a way, but I'm not. I guess I'm less surprised if it's leaders assessing their companies, just in the sense that they could certainly do a lot better, enabling their reps to be successful, right, on these items.
Yep. Yeah, the way I would think about it is in the current, you have the current macro environment, but I think in particular you have like the funding environment for growth companies, which has totally changed. And I think there's this quote that says, "When the tide goes out, you see who's swimming naked." Right? I think that's what's happening here a little bit. Is that leaders and go-to-market executives in start and scale-up growth SaaS tech companies are coming to the conclusion like, oh, now that I have to run a way tighter ship, a way more efficient sales process, I'm falling short. And I think those shortcomings were kind of covered with the veil of love when money was free. And now, like, you're just confronted with the facts that, at this level of efficiency, you need to own up to the fact that your process, your capabilities as an organization just aren't at the level they should be to run a profitable business in an environment like this, right? So to me, that's what I think has also happened for a lot of go-to-market executives in the last 12 months, 18 months.
I also think, though, I agree with that. And I also think I would add, from a customer and buyer perspective, they're in a similar situation, right? Where they are pressed to make difficult decisions. It's easier to stick with status quo. So the journey of a buyer and their needs have shifted. And so I think they're both shifts, right? The buyer is saying, my bar continues to raise on what I am going to change and what I'm going to fund. But then also for our go-to-market folks, they also have to be ready to meet that higher bar. And I agree with you, Hendrik. A lot of that is around what processes, what sort of selling methodologies, what is the inspection that we have as a frontline manager or on your way up, right? All of those things have to be improved to meet that buyer where they are right now. So I think both dynamics probably create this meh graph. Like, we could get better at everything because there's always different needs, I think, that buyers are exhibiting, and different paths that we need to take across all of the go-to-market functions.
I was going to add one more thing, and I guess in violent agreement, right, that we have to get way tighter on the way we do these things. So for clarity, right, Insight Revenue is different than Insight Partners. So Insight Partners, where I'm at, we're a large venture capital firm with about $80 billion of assets under management. It's all SaaS companies. And if I look at the companies that we work with, of these things, where are they focused on? Because, right, they can't do all things all the time. You got to focus and pick out which ones are the most important. I love like Kara and Hendrik, your perspective. What I'm hearing from our portfolio companies and seeing a decent amount of, ton of focus on pricing, because it's just a fast lever, probably the fastest lever. Increasing focus absolutely on like the messaging piece, just to make sure that everyone is able to articulate a common story about what the value drivers are, what the critical capabilities are that match to those value drivers, and then kind of the why, why us, why Pluralsight, why Showpad, that story of, and it's you got 43 different competitors out there all selling or claiming that they sell the same product. So much of it is about how your implementation, if you will, of a particular capability is going to link to the value driver. So yeah, those were some of the ones. I mean, you could certainly pick off other ones here, but those are some of the ones I've been hearing a lot about from our portfolio companies.
No, that's fantastic. That's a great transition for me, because I was going to go by the numbers, and I picked out the sort of the three things that people said that they do worst at. And interestingly, first one is what you mentioned, unique insights. Like, and we've been hearing a lot around that, like wanting to go back to the messaging, make sure you clarify it. Second one, candidly, was a surprise to me. It's account planning. And it's a surprise to me because I joke a little bit with people. I'm like, it can't possibly be for the lack of account plans and sort of templates, etc., that are out there. And yet it is clearly a systematic mess. And then the third one is the business case, that I think sort of honestly link them both together, because in some ways there's no value without a business case, there's no renewal without a business case. And that too, when I looked at it, I was a little surprised by the business case, because I feel like both account planning and the business case are fairly fundamental things. They are not literally new. I don't know if you can see it behind me. I have many books on selling. They would all tend to go there. And again, so I'd love to get your perspective on it. Maybe go into account planning. Like, where do you all see the gap?
I'll kick us off. I think account planning is interesting to me because, to your point, Timur, like I could go find templates of all the major accounts that we have at Pluralsight and exactly what's, sort of my power map, what our success criteria are, what our plan is to expand or retain that account. I think the thing that maybe makes people feel like those plans are not doing justice in this environment is that they're not action oriented and they're not changing across time. So I think, again, thinking about the macros and thinking about how much is changing within organizations that we're trying to sell to. There are so many things that happen with executive changes, with budget changes, with priority changes, with performance that's happening across the company lifecycle. And I think sometimes account plans sit and collect dust, and they're not malleable and changing with the environment in front of the account executives. And so they feel like it's not doing them service on what needs to go happen next and now. And I think, again, this is about these fundamental changes that are happening and how quickly some things can change on us that we think are sort of tried and true. So one of the things we've been trying to do at Pluralsight is think about the tooling, which I'm sure Jeremey has probably some strong opinions on, but the tooling around account planning. So what gives us a real-time view into what's happening in the account? What are the actions we want our success team and our sales team to take? What are the things we're seeing in the account that has changed, even as we're looking at what we're expecting from the account from a bookings or retention perspective? Is there something that's changed that's going to actually help me to forecast better the outcome that I expect from that account because I'm looking at this real-time data and engagement in the account? So I think my suspicion is that that's the rub on account planning. We've got a very beautiful template. We can tell you all the things, but is it actually driving action? And is it taking into consideration what's happening across that account lifecycle?
That's an excellent perspective. Hendrik, I wonder if that ties in with what you said about wanting profitability suddenly mattering a lot more.
Yeah, and I was so building on Kara's point, like I think we're not doing account planning worse than we were 12 or 36 months ago. I think
No.
it's just something that companies don't do well is account planning. But because of a change in the behavior of our buyer, it is now surfaced, or it's surfacing as more painful. And I think the changes there are twofold. One, like in tech companies, our customers' budgets are also tightening. And so not only is your business case now more important, you actually have to go work the account. You have to go sweat the account. They're not coming in Showpad's case, like our customers aren't saying, oh, I just added 100 new sales reps, so can I get 100 new licenses? That's not happening right now. So you actually have to go find the new divisions. You have to go find the white space in those accounts if you want to keep the same net retention rates, you want to keep the same upsell rates. But then I think another thing that's going on over the last 2 to 3 years is we've seen that post-COVID, a lot of meetings are virtual also for purchasing decisions. And as a result, the decision-making unit has exploded, right? Has gone up from, I think on average, it was 8 people before COVID. And now on average, you have 16 to 20 people on a given evaluation for a product. And so account planning then becomes even more important because you need to go and understand, like, who are all these people? Like, what are all of these people's priorities in our in the decision? And account planning becomes more important there.
And the other thing I've been hearing from people, sales leaders in particular, is suddenly the CSM becomes more important. Because in theory, they're in charge of expansion sales. And so I'm wondering, and that seems fraught to me. And so I was curious to hear what you've all seen around that.
Yeah, I'll pause the CSM thing just for a second. And a side note on CSMs, just to prime that, is like, I read LinkedIn for where the eye of Sauron is turning its gaze, and the gaze has been on outbound SDRs for a while, and then in the last couple of weeks, the gaze has definitely turned to customer success in a pretty big way. A comment on account planning though. So years back at Dreamforce, Salesforce did a Salesforce on Salesforce, how they do account planning, and I thought it was an awesome session, and outlined key criteria and so forth. And I followed up with the presenters of that session a year later, and I asked, how's that going? That seemed awesome. And they said the whole thing collapsed. And so I think this is part of the issue, right? Which is all strategies are people, process, technology in that order. And the challenge that Salesforce ran into with their own account planning at the time was you had RevOps and trying to kind of promote this account plan methodology, and it was really very decentralized, like up to the individual leaders of the different regions on the degree to which it mattered. And then I think that was kind of the biggest thing in the process. And then it was a people problem before it was a product. Like, they had the process nailed, they had the technology nailed. They ultimately acquired the technology that they were using, right, and added to their own stack for that. But so this thing around, like, anything you want to change, whether it's any one of these three things we see here, is like the CRO and CEO need to care, they need to expect, they need to inspect. So much so that I was meeting with one of our portfolio companies. I wasn't expecting it, but they were rolling out account plans last week for their team, and the CRO, who's like other, kind human, but radical candor, right? And he said it is a condition of employment that you do these. And he was talking to his first line sales managers first, like, it's a condition of employment that you do this, and it's a condition of employment that your people do this. And so I think you need that kind of discipline for these things to stick. And I think that's one of the reasons why the adoption, or whatever it is, that like the degree to which they think they're effective at this is so low.
Yeah. Let's spark the thought from my end. I mean, what do you think of the complexity of the thing? My sense more and more is that the trend has been towards things that are ever more descriptively perfect. But it strikes me it's a bit like having a perfectly descriptive map that would not realistically be all that useful in the scheme of things. And I sometimes wonder if we've forgotten the focus on, like, actually it's 5 things you need to know and not 625.
Yeah, just in brief, we did a complimentary survey of kind of what you did, and of the components of the account plan that matter most, it's the relationship map. Who are the people and what is their influence and authority? That's the number one thing that matters.
And then what's the strategy to getting those people to consider us a priority, right? I think that's what I'm seeing with a lot of account plans, both at Showpad, but also like when we talk to our customers and their challenges, is account plans aren't just like, here's a picture of what my customer looks like. It should be a plan, and that plan should have a vision for what should this account be for our company. Like, what should our what should the future result be at this company, and then actually build a plan towards it. That's what I'm often missing in account plans.
That's interesting, because that's then the third piece that people have said is missing, the business case, basically. Like, what is the ROI and the risk associated with not getting it right, and that too seems like a struggle.
Yep.
But let me move on a little bit to beyond effectiveness. So, what did people think was important by category? And here, fascinatingly, across companies, you actually see fair consensus, right? So not everybody thinks awareness is literally the most important thing. But right now, what companies are telling me is that what they feel like they don't have is sort of, potential customers having a good sense for, what is it that the solution stands for. And I'm wondering why you think that is. Where do you think where has the world of sales awareness gone wrong? And again, it can't be for the lack of outbound, literally.
Well,
I think Google just made clear there's no more email.
I think there's no bigger flattery than regurgitating what someone else has said. And so Jeremy posted it on LinkedIn recently that the average number of touch points went from to get to an opportunity went from 400 to 1200. I think it was Jeremy that you did the quick math, right? So in a couple of years, the number of touch points you need with a customer to get to an opportunity have tripled. Now, I'm hard-pressed to think that the solution to solving that problem is to go to 2,000 touch points, right? Like, I don't think that's the solution. I think we've reached the limit of the model, right? The model where we're just automating shitty buying experiences, right? To just say it bluntly, like that's what we've been doing over the last couple of years. And so the question is, rather than automate my outbound, my conversations, my connections with my customers, how do I augment them? How do I make them more relevant? How do I make them more engaging, right? And I think that's obviously something that a lot of businesses are struggling with right now, is that they have to radically rethink how they're going to market, because it's not just about BDRs, it's also marketing automation, our nurture campaigns. Like, actually all these things are the same. They are automating emails that we sent out. And in a way, like, the question is, how relevant does that become? And how much of that is just being filtered out by buyers right now? I think a lot of it is being filtered out. And we're running into that issue, I think, as commercial leaders, that you need new ways to go and create pipeline.
I think Jeremy's post was basically, to me, the case for personalization and precision around what does your outbound structure look like. And I couldn't agree with you more, Hendrik. I think it's about not just the sellers or the BD organizations, but also the marketing organization. And I think one of the concepts we're trying to really implement is thinking about that right now ICP, which goes back to the way we started the conversation around who is your right now ICP based on this macro, based on what you see in your win-loss analysis. Where are you finding the most success? What does that buyer look like? And then what's the set of messaging and insight that we can provide to that buyer in a very personalized way? By the way, I know that this conversation isn't really about tooling, but there are some really cool new tools on the market that provide hyper personalization at scale. And I think they're really interesting when you're thinking about, if I've got the right marketing and sort of product marketing around that ICP, and I can enable my sellers and by the way, my success leaders as well when we're thinking about renewal, because I think that's looking, I know, Timur, we kind of moved off that topic. It's looking more and more like a resale every time, right? So how am I equipping everybody in the go-to-market organization with very specific, highly relevant messaging and insights for that right now ICP, so that I can have more personalized touches and really try to cut through that noise? But I think this game is being forced, right, by the new news and sort of it's not working. To your point, we can't do 4,000 to get to an opportunity. It's just going to continue to rise. So how are we getting really customized and personalized, but still at scale, realistically, right, in order to try to make sure that we have the right awareness and that we're in the set of the set of consideration for our buyers, and we're one of the 43, as Jeremy says, right? Like we want to be in that patch. So I think that this is super important.
One of the CEOs I used to work for had this expression. I didn't understand it at first. I had to ask him for clarification, but he said, "You can't scale suck." And like that's what we've done, right? We've scaled suck basically. And yeah, I do, right? It's like back to the whatever it is, back to the future. These things about much more personalized outreach are coming to the fore. The other thing I think we're seeing a lot of is the importance of exec-led sourcing. So it's not that the exec needs to manage the opportunity, but they're definitely opening the doors in a way that I hadn't seen in a long time. A good example of this, I was having dinner with one of our portfolio companies, and they're not huge, this particular one, and the CEO of Gong, they were in a sales cycle for conversation intelligence, and the CEO of Gong called this CEO that prior day to just offer to help out, in any way, right? And that's what they can do. You're building trust in a way that's unique. So in that case, they weren't sourcing, but they were helping close, right, by just saying, "I'm a phone call away from you." So I think that exec engagement is huge. I'll just also comment on the awareness side. Yeah, like it's so much noise. I think I'll use the Gong example, I guess, again, right? Is Gong was able to drive exceptional awareness. And like, how did they do that? They did that with, right, incredible data-driven insights and a tone, if you will, a personality, right? And I was listening also to another podcast recently that was the CEO and founder of Tableau. Same thing, right? Like, different approach. It wasn't about the data-drivenness, but it was about building like this, easier said than done, but this community of viral supporters, and that reinforces itself. So I do think you just need to get 10 times more. Again, this is like go score more points. Okay, how? Go sell more, go close more deals. How? But you like the degree of creativity has ramped up, and the amount of value that you need to add, right, in the course of these conversations is just so much higher to drive awareness.
Mm-hmm.
I do also think that part of the solution as well is, as sales teams, we need to learn how to do more with less opportunities, with less at-bats, right? Like, to give you an example, in Showpat, we have this functionality where you record your pitch as a seller and your manager then reviews it, right? On average, a seller will hit the re-record button 8 times. So this means they've tried their pitch 8 times before it's submitted to the manager. Now, would you prefer that we give them 8 leads to try that, like 8 leads to go and try their pitch before the 9th time they actually feel it's good enough to submit? No, like, we have to practice more. The bar has to be higher for reps to receive leads, for reps to receive good opportunities. Like, it has to be a higher bar, because they can't, sorry to use the word, but they can't F it up, right? Like, It is hard to create opportunities. It is hard to create demand. And so the sales team needs to be accountable for better execution on that demand as well. I think that has to be part of the solution. It can't just be about driving more top of the funnel.
I'm going to throw out a very quick but controversial, I've seen different sides around role specialization versus not. So when we talk about prospecting, what's the quick point of view on what percentage of an AE's time should be spent prospecting versus leaving that up to more of an outbound team motion? Because I know it's a very popular topic these days.
Oh, I have so much to say on this, but
I know, Jeremy. I was like, I'm ceding the floor.
I'll try not to like drone on. To me, this is people get angry, like, is sales math or not math? Like, to some extent, sales is math. So when I think about this problem, BDRs are basically like labor arbitrage, and you are gaining focus and productivity at the expense of less effectiveness. But the bet you're making is that you're going to gain more than you're going to lose. And like, to me, when I advise our portfolio companies, like, we have and I'm happy to share it more publicly also, like, we have a model, and we put in the cost of an AE, the cost of a BDR, the productivity of an AE, the productivity of a BDR, the win rates, the ACVs, like, you put all that stuff in, it all mashes together in a model, and it outputs to you what your ratio of BDRs to AEs should be. In some instances, that could be 0 BDRs. And in other instances, that could be even 2 BDRs or more per AE. Like, it just, so it's not simple. It depends, but it depends in a way that is actually mathematically modelable. So I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with role specialization. But if we're in the mode now, where it takes whatever 1,200 to 1,400 touches to source, a qualified opportunity, then the math is gearing itself way more towards the AE side right now. I think the other compounding factor is that SaaS companies in particular hired like a lot of AEs, and they're sitting on excess capacity. And when AEs were like capacity constrained, then it made sense for BDRs to prospect. When the AEs are not as, they're not as capacity constrained, they don't have as many meetings, they don't have as many opportunities, they now have spare capacity. So there's no labor arbitrage that you gain if your AEs are idle. Like, you might as well just put them to work prospecting. So you asked about the percentage of time, like, without the long answer, a lot of people say 30% of their time. Like, that's the short answer, but it could vary.
Awesome.
I mean, the thought it sparks is this also, you all, the three of you seem to argue for what I think is a much more dynamic, flexible sales process. But that too, I think, breaks the math a little bit, or not.
This is, I mean, I guess my thought as Jeremy was speaking was just how some of these functions that we're talking about are aligned, particularly when you're thinking about marketing and your business development organization and your sellers. And so I couldn't agree more with Jeremy's math. Like, you have to do the math on what does your AE and BD capacity need to look like, but your marketing team also needs to be aligned in this whole sort of process around how many opportunities do we have? What's our nurture strategy? How is marketing supporting the pipeline effort? How are BD supporting it? And how are AEs supporting it? And what are the expectations across that set of groups? And I do find a lot of times, especially when you're working on reporting all of the things and reporting by really silo or discipline, you can miss this whole, what is the total pipe gen target, or what is the total opportunity? And so I know we're saying, well, we don't want to just focus on putting things in the funnel, but in some ways, I want to make sure that the conversation in our organization is really moving to, I know John Miller from Demand Based always posts about this, right? Just what's the total target and how is each group contributing to this sort of top of funnel, and then as they go through customer journey, and what's the role that each function has to play in order to make that successful, and in order, to Jeremy's point, to make the math work, right? So I'm going to continue to pull those levers to say what makes the most sense for me as an efficiency perspective, right? Where do I want to spend my money? But then when I'm looking at where I'm spending, how is that working for me? And what is each team delivering against these efficiency targets and total outcomes that we're trying to drive? So I just think that part of this too is around how are you breaking those silos and making sure all of those teams are coming together to really think about that. And Zach, so that's also part of your question around, yes, role specialization. And by the way, Timur, I don't think the sales process necessarily needs to be flexible. It just needs to be nimble. I love a very tight sales process, but
Yep.
I think, in the same way, you want to know exactly what each party has to do in that sales process. And then the reality is it might bounce all around, right? You might be mid-cycle, somebody's bouncing all the way back to, sorry, not interested, bad timing. And then how is your marketing team going to pick that up? How is your BD team coming in after they express more interest and potentially get sort of warm again, right? So that's the stuff that I like to think about along that sales process. How am I measuring it? And then how am I getting all these groups together to really think about how we drive
That's an excellent point. And I mean, in a multi-threaded world, realistically, not all your buyers they're not going to march in lockstep. Like you are always going to find people.
The process is no longer linear, unfortunately, because it was a lot easier when it was.
That gives me a good transition. I thought we could look at the sort of the importance items by attribute. And so here I've given it in, this is just the importance scores. It's a utility score per attribute. And it gives you a sense of the prioritization. And again, it's and the interesting thing here to me, and if you do this by company, it gets interesting. It gives you a sense of sort of how much more important the top thing is versus the bottom thing. This is not to say that questioning skills are unimportant in terms of being able to ask good questions, but by and large, like people would say, being able to build awareness is maybe 5 times as important at this point in time. And it's a pretty tight list with sort of a cliff drop almost. It's the sort of building awareness, the unique insights, having an ICP or many ICPs realistically, being able to qualify and then being able to spark interest. So it's very much across companies. And again, I do want to emphasize, no single company's results would look like this exactly, but this is the market at large. And this gives you a sense of the prioritization. And if I put it all together, and this is really the main slide, but I thought we'd build up to the really, really complicated slide. It gives you a sense of, the blue is again the effectiveness scores. The purple is that prior chart, but this time in sequence. And what you're getting here is, and it's interesting, it's sort of the beginning is the most important part, everything around sort of, being able to build the funnel, generating interest, and then it goes up again, interestingly. I mean, it's telling me that at this point in time, at least, the conversation, everything, the closing conversation is regarded as a little less urgent. That makes sense to me. If at this moment in time thing, like realistically, if you've got the procurement, you've probably got a deal. Hendrik.
I think that's exactly right. I think the challenge that I see with sellers in our market, but also in other tech companies that we work with, it's the hardest thing is to get the consideration. And it's, by the way, it's not to be part of the competitive consideration set. It's actually for, in my case, sales enablement to be a priority, right? So that's the first step is, are you actually going to engage your decision-making unit? Are you going to free up the budget to do an evaluation on sales enablement? And then it's okay. Now we're gonna pit you up against your competitors. But it's that first step that I think so many companies are struggling with. And again, given like the data set seems very skewed to SaaS tech companies, I also think that in the last 10 years, 15 years, in the time of cheap capital, free capital, like there's just so many point solutions that have emerged. So many companies that have been founded because money was cheap, and everyone's fighting for the attention of these buyers. Everyone's fighting for the attention of these couple of decision makers, business unit leaders that are making the decision on the purchase. And yeah, you're starting that starts to come together at the start of the funnel, where people are just having a hard time getting companies to consider an investment. Then from there, once that's the hard work. Once you've done that, like you're very likely to win the deal. You probably have like a 30 to 40% chance of winning it, versus in these early stages, it's maybe 2 to 3%. We were talking about the math earlier. Well, if you have lead to one deal conversion rates of 2 to 3%, like good luck. Like you need to generate a ton of pipeline, and your marketing team is just physically not able to generate that amount of pipeline.
The obvious follow-on is, and again, Kara, you touched on this, like when I look at this, some of the importance items are also breakpoints. Like this is where the silos come into it a little bit. The first is sort of maybe more marketing. Towards the end, it's sort of account managers and CSMs. And I wanted to start with marketing, honestly. Like, obviously, this is mostly salespeople, so to some degree, they're telling us, okay, maybe we want more marketing, but what kinds of marketing are you seeing work, and where? How do you see the two functions blend?
I keep looking at Jeremy like he's the source of all knowledge and off of that. I'm happy to chime in. I do think, I think Hendrik makes a great point. Like there's only, in the same way that we only have so much money to spend on our BD organizations and our sales organizations, it's not like marketing's budget has massively expanded in this environment either for all of the SaaS companies that I know and talk to. And so it's almost the same concept to me around what are the most efficient dollars and where are those dollars going and what do we see from a conversion perspective. So I think there's some really interesting things happening around, certain places like LinkedIn, for example. Is that one of the most effective places that we can have our marketing team spend money? We've had a big conversation internally about field events. Field events used to be super awesome, right? And we'd spend millions of dollars on those things. We don't have millions of dollars. Let's think about like how we reframe those types of things. What are the partners in our ecosystem and how do we rethink events? So I think that there's a lot of work in the same way sellers and, sort of sales executives in the survey are saying, we need to get better. We need to get more targeted. We need to get more efficient. The same thing's happening in marketing. So I think the two things that I've seen are, the same rigor that's applied to all of those marketing dollars and where they're going. How are we then aligning? Again, if we're going to go spend money on LinkedIn, how are we following up on that? Who are the sellers and how are the BD teams aligned to that spend? Or if we're going to go do an event, what are our expectations and how is the whole team aligned around either a customer event or a prospect event, right? To make sure that those alignments are really tight. But then the other thing I think on this right-hand side of the graph around what is the role of customer marketing or what is the role of this touch point along the customer journey, I think is super interesting. And I know we still haven't touched the sort of success side, but I think this is just so important right now as we think about what's happening in organizations with our solution and how our buyers and our customers are really adopting our technologies and using them. What are the things that we're doing to make sure that that's continuing to happen so that we can get the outcomes we need? Then that's not always, to Jeremy's point on math of like, who's most efficient. Sometimes it's a lot more efficient to have that marketing air cover across that customer journey, along with your humans who are driving specific events and specific things that drive the renewal outcomes you want. But I think it's really interesting to think about, okay, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, marketing was all about sort of brand awareness and, kind of these big showy events. What does it need to be now that matches, again, all of the trends that we're talking about on the sales side and on the customer side? Those are some of the things that I've been working on with my CMO around how we're getting more efficient and effective with our marketing spend.
Yeah, and I don't this is where account based as a topic comes up, right? I don't think people at large, myself included, by the way, really understand account based. I mean, I've yet to really see anyone awesome at it and or even define it well. But like to this point of this conversation, right? It's if you need to be efficient with your marketing dollars, it means sales and marketing have aligned in a target account list. And against that target account list, right, you are now finally doing the coordinated surround sound deal, right? Whether it's like LinkedIn, your EAEs, your BDRs, executive outreach, right? Like you're coming at these people with like a playbook of tactics in order to engage them so that speaking back to the awareness point, you're kind of all over that. The other comment I had on marketing is I discovered a new podcast recently. It's not new; it was new to me, and have become a fast advocate and follower of it. It's the Revenue Vitals podcast from Chris Walker. So marketing people knew who he was. Since I'm a salesperson, I didn't. But yeah, he talked Kara like about the exact things that you mentioned. It's like I had a follow-up conversation with him one-on-one. Where are people paring back? Because they are paring back, right? And they're paring back on like those big events because that booth is generating a lot of MQLs, but salespeople don't want MQLs. What salespeople want is a demo request, right? Like, and Chris also makes the point that MQLs, and I think he's right, are a vanity metric. It's you really have to track each one of those channels, whether it's partners, whether it's events, whether it owned events, whether it's paid social, whether it's whatever, like whatever these programs are, you got to track them through to close. Years ago, I was a CMO and I was helping staff a booth, and we were super aggressive booth people, walking out in the aisles and grabbing people and scanning their badges, and we went back, and 3 months later we had converted zero, not one, right, of the people we scan. So yeah, it is about how do I deliver more demo requests to AEs? I think that's the end goal.
Building on what you said, Jeremy, I think there's data as well showing that buyers on average have already completed 60% of the sales cycle, right, of the decision before they first engage. So before they do a demo request, before they first engage with the seller. So I think it's like marketing's responsibility is really thinking through like what's the buying journey look like when they're still in the dark. And all that work we do is not going to show up in MQLs. It's not going to show up in leads. Like we're not going to notice that. We're not going to be able to measure that necessarily. But we need to feel really confident that when someone's considering a purchase of a platform like ours, like they find all of the content and we're the go-to place. Like we're the go-to place, and they don't need to leave us their data. They don't need to leave us their email address so that we start spamming them, but they can just go on, get on with what they're trying to do. And then when they're ready, they already consider you like an awesome advisor to them. And then it becomes a demo request. But the difficulty with that is like when you're in the executive seat and you're then thinking through, okay, I'm putting in all of that effort. Like, how do I see whether my leading indicators are moving in the right direction? It's hard, right? Like that's super difficult.
Yeah, I think you need to devote. Whenever I've been in operating roles, I always like negotiate ratios with CEOs and CFOs, right? So in the case of marketing, I would say, look, I'm going to devote 10% of my marketing budget to brand, and I am not going to be able to measure that, right? And you just have to trust the team that we're going to spend that money judiciously, and have the biggest impact. Because yeah, it is right, absolutely true. We're in the process of buying a conversation intelligence solution for our company, and yeah, like before we engaged a vendor, to Hendrik, to your point, we shortlisted 3 or 4 folks, and we shortlisted them based on like G2, grids and or word of mouth in some of the forums, right? Like Pavilion or Modern Sales Pros, or just talking to, phone a friend. Like, yeah, that absolutely is driving the decision.
Yep.
I'm going to go to a quick question. We got a couple questions that surfaced from the audience across the time. I'll throw 1 or 2 of these out now. We've got about 10 minutes left. So Juan Monedero here in Spain, he's thinking about, how do you consider spending more time on detecting prospects that already have existing intent versus actually spending your time on educating to develop that intent? I think to the point you were making, Hendrik, how do you get to that calculation? Is there a formula for it?
I don't know if there's a formula for it, but I will say like the problem with intent is, what if there are not enough prospects in your category that are showing intent to fuel your growth ambitions, right? Like, sure, everyone's talking about, oh yeah, modern executives, they manage towards intent and they build their funnels towards intent, etc., etc. But what if the intent doesn't meet like your growth aspirations and your growth objectives? That's difficult. And that's where, like, and look, I'm a sales enablement. Showpad's been a category builder, right? Like, we started sales enablement when people still called it putting sales content on an iPad. That's what it was 10 years ago. Now it's a whole suite of solutions. And yeah, so that's in our DNA, is going out and educating prospects. And we have this internal joke. It's probably not going to resonate, but I'll use it anyways. We call it triple baking the potato. So we're a global company. We have American executives and European executives, and we were laughing that the Americans triple bake their potatoes. And so this kind of became this concept where we have to triple bake our leads, right? Like, the first time, we're just talking to them and making them aware of, hey, there is such a thing called sales enablement. The second time, they're like, I had a couple of issues in my company. I was thinking sales enablement might be a good solution for me, but I don't have the budget yet. And the third time, they're like, holy shit, we have a problem. We need sales enablement now, right? But that is a 18-month to 24-month cycle. And so you need to, and that's where I think our earlier discussion on BDR AEs need to take responsibility there. AEs need to track those people that we consider high value leads, because at some point, maybe not now, but at some point they're going to buy because they're the right audience for us to buy. And those, like, the intent might not be there, and you have to stick close to them. It's not an answer to the question. I don't have the answer. I don't know how you model it. It really depends on the maturity of your category and the demand for your services. But I do think it's important that you separate those two. And then obviously marketing has to also think about, how do we drive intent? How does our messaging create intent, create urgency, create scarcity, right? Like, that's what marketing can do to help with that.
Thanks, Hendrik. And I think there's one other question that came up earlier, but it ties in really well to probably one of the concepts most near and dear to our heart, and I'm sure Insight partners as well. It's about insight, right? Like, we're talking, and you see here the unique insights being one of the toughest things to get right and so important. And when you think about cutting through that noise and how you're actually executing, whether you're trying to create demand, shape demand, or capture demand, as you differentiate yourself, might be maybe a topic just to hit on. We had a question about, how do you really think about capturing those insights, and then automation and scaling to surface the insights from sellers, to use those in the organization versus more the human element. So obviously there's the human elements of feedback, but there's also the automation and scaling. So maybe as a topic to dive into, like, what's hard about getting insights right, and what are the things that you guys are seeing it's actually working these days?
This is where I think the product team can be really helpful and insightful around what's actually happening in your platform and what is your base really gravitating to. I mean, there's obviously all of this competitive intel and all these cool tools, right, where you can kind of figure out, okay, how am I differentiated? And you need to be in certain places showing that differentiated value proposition. But one of the things that we've been working on is really trying to connect our product team and our success team with the way that we're thinking about the upfront insights and how we're talking throughout the sales process, even in the marketing process as well. And there are certain things in our platform that are really differentiated. And when you go in and look at the customers who are using them, you get these really interesting, pretty amazing value stories that our success team can uncover and talk about. And then you pull that through and you think about, okay, well, how did that start? What are the things that they were trying to accomplish? What are the things that they had as objectives in front of them with limited budget, limited time, limited resources? And how did they achieve this outcome that we see in this account? By the way, we can see it through the usage and adoption. We can see it through the renewal outcome, right? And we're taking it all the way back into, how does that help you to think about how you create demand and create those insights? It really, to me, there's a lot of work that you can do by pulling from your base and pulling from your product, what's happening in your product, to say, there's some really key insights that we have here. And for us, we have literally thousands and thousands and thousands of learners on our platform. There's some really cool data. So we've been trying to pull that and say, okay, product team, tell us what's happening, so that we can then deliver those insights at the front end through our marketing teams, through our BD teams, and through our AEs. So just a thought, but I do think that's, again, about breaking that silo, right? How connected is your product team with your go-to-market team and your success team around what needs to happen in the product, but also what is happening so that we can unearth that and teach that to potential prospects and even to customers who maybe aren't trending towards the right outcome, right? What's the difference in that? What's the insight that we can deliver? What's the set of tools or outcomes that we can show and demonstrate early so that we get people sort of understanding why we're different and why they want to choose us?
But that's
Yeah.
terrific. And honestly, like, we have a few minutes, and look, these are the three things that people said are both really important and typically poorly done. And I was going to change the question a little bit. What's the best thing you've seen recently, like, that addresses some of these issues?
Well, it kind of relates. I mean, I'm going to continue the insights thing, but it actually is a best thing, right? So I was having a conversation with a sales leader recently about this insights thing, right? Because we all, another what, but not the how, which is we all want our sellers to deliver unique insights and value to prospects and customers. And then it's like, yeah, but how, right? And I would say two things, and I'll do the cool thing second. So the first thing is basically, there's no substitute for rep tenure, and we make a huge mistake with like either hiring too fast, too much, whatever, turning over people too fast, not enabling them successfully because, right, like I worked with Kara's brother, and you know he worked with me at SalesLoft for a number of years, and like over time he could tell great stories about customers that he had worked with and like the successes they had gotten. It's really hard to tell other people's stories, right? And the same thing, like in my current job of helping portfolio companies out, like it's taken me 2 years to really have a good bank of stories that I can just like on the dime pull out a story that's relevant to the context of, you know, the company that I'm talking to. I think the cool thing was I was talking about this exact subject to a sales leader or CRO, and I said, like, how do you overcome that? How do you ramp people faster? And he said, yeah, well, we focus, like, we have 3 stories that we've identified, and we certify and train people on each one of those 3 stories so that, like, yes, you're telling somebody else's story, but we've drilled it, you know, to Hendrik's point about 8 times, so practicing, like we've just drilled it into their heads and certified them so that they can present that story as if it's their own. That to me is one of the coolest things I've seen on the insight side.
Very cool. Hendrik, you're in the business of enablement and sort of the drill. What's the best thing you've recently seen?
Mine, the one that comes to mind for me isn't about enablement. It's actually on this topic of tailoring your approach to customers. We had our marketing team give an update to the sales team on their plan and everything they're doing. And we just had like one of our most tenured sales leaders interrupt the meeting and was like, look, I just really want to tell you, like, I've never had this much confidence in the marketing plan as I've had now, right? And I think the main reason he said that was he feels that marketing is by his side in the field, and he needs that because he needs to get more tailored in his approach, right? Like they need to think through together, okay, we have this high value account, how are we going to rally around it? And it's probably going to require a slightly different approach depending on the situation that customer's in and the unique insights or the unique challenges that they have, right? And so that was just that unlocked it with me a little bit, because I think we've been so focused on optimization over the last 5 years that we kind of forgot like how powerful it is, for example, to just go meet a customer face to face. Showpad has actually deprioritized internal travel and put more money again on external travel to go see customers, because that human element is what cuts through the noise now, right? So that's one thing that I've seen is super helpful, and I'm starting to feel more companies are looking for that face to face and how to empower it.